Working with Thinners. It's me, Charlene, again, here with another episode of season 3 of Working Within. Oh my God, that's so cute. I'm excited today because y'all are going to meet Mr. Aaron Walker of Camelback Ventures. Aaron is a serial entrepreneur. Aaron helps serial entrepreneurs, guides them through their entrepreneurial journeys, especially social entrepreneurs. I just think that's so dope. And I think it's a utilized resource, like having these fellowships that allow entrepreneurs to come together with each other and learn about capital, collaboration, partnership, raising the bar for their organizations and ventures. I think that's so important. And Aaron is someone who's done this since the beginning and starts from, the humble beginnings of, hey, I started out with these 3 organizations and now we're here, with this large organization that helps 40 fellows every year, So I just think that story is really cool, and it really models kind of what I envision for myself and, whatever else comes to vision as well, because I really believe in being able to incubate the ideas of Black entrepreneurs, Black founders, Black women founders, and help and provide the resources and support that I can and that a team can, helping them launch their ideas off the ground. Because as Aaron mentions later in this interview, we are entrepreneurs. Black people are entrepreneurs. Harriet Tubman was an entrepreneur. We've had a lot of that spirit and energy in us. And as Aaron mentions later in this episode, this is something that we have been doing and is maybe the reason, right, why we're still here, because we were meant to die, And so I think that this whole story about Black entrepreneurship is really important today. Thank you for tuning in. Let me know how you feel about it. Feel free to hit our DM at working.within or email me at charlene@workingwithin.net. Y'all be blessed. Have a great time listening to this episode, and we'll see you next time. All right. Hello, everyone. Welcome back to another episode of season 3 for the Working Within podcast. As you all are aware, season 3 has been full of folks that I've met by happy happenstance, and serendipity has brought us together. The same is true for our upcoming guest, Mr. Aaron Walker, who is the founder and CEO of Camelback Ventures. Aaron and I got to know each other in New Orleans, interestingly enough. And I got to learn again from another serial entrepreneur how their life is just kind of fallen into place. And if listeners, you know me and you've been listening, you are quite aware that entrepreneurship, and serial entrepreneurship at that, is something that deeply interests me, especially when it's targeted toward folks who haven't had the chance to do that historically and toward folks that look like me. And so I'm really excited to have Aaron on the show, and we're going to have a great conversation about his venture, what his work has been like today, and kind of some of his beliefs. So, Aaron, I'm happy to pass over to you to introduce yourself to our audience. Feel free to include your role, pronouns, and your zodiac sign, because Working Within cares about that.
Excellent. Well, it is a pleasure to be here. So thank you for the invitation. As you shared, my name is Aaron Walker. I live in New Orleans, but was born and raised in New Jersey. I'm a Gemini.
Yes.
That is my sign. Although I've learned from one of my colleagues, that you have a sun sign and a moon sign. So apparently Gemini is just my sun sign. I don't remember exactly what my moon sign is. I think it is Taurus, but I have to go double check with the powers that be. So that's that. I'm a son to Eugene and Denise, and it's been like an interesting last 2 decades. I started my career as a teacher. Thought that going to law school would give me the skills to help figure out how to create the world that I wanted to see. And so I went to law school and practiced law for a little while. But over the last dozen or so years, have really honed in on entrepreneurship as the area that I'm most interested in, and where I think I can make the most difference by supporting other visionaries who have these amazing ideas, but oftentimes don't necessarily have the requisite resources to make them come to fruition for no fault of their own. And so we're trying to fix that through Camelback Ventures.
Yes, Camelback Ventures and Visionaries. Somehow, I just love the way that Ventures, Visionary, they have the same starting sounds with the V. And what you describe about visionaries, I think, is so important because, I was just reading a book and I usually have it right next to me. It's called A Good Strategy, Bad Strategy. And while it's such a valuable book, like every instance and example is like, okay, they started a business in like the 40s, which by the way, we couldn't do that then. And it's like these white guys own these businesses and that's great and everything. And like, yeah, we have economic principles we learned from that. And there are plenty of people that have really great ideas that just haven't been able to have the resources that you just mentioned. So I think that's so important and we're going to dive into that. But you mentioned Camelback Ventures toward the end here, which is perfect, a perfect setup. Thank you. Could you tell us a bit more about what you do at Camelback in totality, and then also your role specifically within it and what that means kind of you're doing day to day?
Yeah, definitely. So Camelback Ventures, the mission of the organization is to invest in women and people of color by investing in their ventures, but also their leadership, and to try to advocate for fairness in funding, particularly for those who identify as BIPOC, women, or non-binary. And so we do that in a couple of ways. One is we have a fellowship program that's sort of what we built the organization on. And it is four-ish month program where we write all founders a $40,000 check. And we really try to say we want to be the friends and family for people who don't have it. Oftentimes in entrepreneurship, people ask you, so how much did you raise in your friends and family round? And, like myself, when I started, I was like, a couple $1,000, but that's really a drop in the bucket to what most entrepreneurs need to be successful. The average business starts up with about $30,000. And so when you think about the sort of compounding effect of the racial wealth gap, what it means oftentimes for, entrepreneurs of color is that they just don't have the resources to start a business well capitalized, right? And if you start a company undercapitalized, it tends to build on itself, and so the fellowship tries to address that through writing a check, but also through providing them with, connections to help them grow their business and coaching to sort of build their leadership. And then, obviously there's a great community of folks that they get to be in the fellowship with. So that's part one. Part two is we have a program we started a couple of years ago called the Capital Collaborative. And the reason we started that was what we were seeing is that Camelback fellows were outperforming their white and or male peers. They had more revenue 12 months after leaving Camelback's program as compared to, white entrepreneurs leaving other programs. Their impact metrics were to the extent that they cared about that were better, but they were getting outraced 3-1. And we said, that's wild. Oftentimes the story is, oh, they don't have this, they don't have that, they don't have enough traction. And so here we had a 6-year data set, which was saying, it's not about traction. And it's really just about bias in the system. And so what are we going to do about that? And so we thought that we needed to use our platform not just to support entrepreneurs, because they're just one part of the ecosystem. In many ways, the folks who sort of set the conditions are the resource holders, are the capital allocators. And so how can we influence capital allocators to allocate dollars to those who actually are performing the best? And there are cases where that includes folks who they're saying no to for issues of their own bias. And so, we have this really bold vision that over the next, 5-10 years, we're going to help to move, tens, if not hundreds of millions of dollars, towards entrepreneurs of color, so we can start to, level the playing field, and we don't have to open up another digital publication where it's like, Black women only get 0.006% of venture capital funding. It's ridiculous.
Literally. We don't need any other publications that say that. We are all fully aware. We're fully aware. Okay.
Right. Now, to me, it's just kind of like, what is it? Like, sick and tired of being sick and tired about these things. So, like, how can we just change it? Now, do I think it's going to happen overnight? Absolutely not. And do I think that one organization is going to be able to do it all by themselves. Absolutely not. But I think we have a role to play, and so we want to try to do that.
Yeah, and it's a significant effort too to be able to have, because we're in the data age. So to have a 6 years set of data that says, no, it's not actually all these other excuses. It is systematic bias, and that
Yep.
we could have a whole conversation on that too. But something you mentioned about being undercapitalized, that really rung true with me because, I'm a budding entrepreneur myself. And that is something so typical, that there's not enough resources or money. And you have folks who are starting ventures while they're working. And it just becomes a whole set of very complicated variables that maybe aren't the story for others who are able to raise that 40 grand in a friend's family round, for example. And the fact that undercapitalization can build on itself it hit me in the heart, because that's important to know. And that's so scary because, like bankrupt finances and having the capital and resources you need to build are extremely important. And again, in this book, we talk about how growth is something that people sometimes look for, except that's also more expensive. Growth is more expensive. And so thinking about all that. But I know the last time we talked, Erin, that you told me about how Camelback started, and how it started very small and intimate. Can you tell the audience a bit about how that started?
Yeah, definitely. So, in full transparency, the Camelback is the third company that I started. The first two have come and gone. And so I think in many ways, those two early failures set me up for Camelback. And it was hard to know that at the time. You just sort of wallowing in your own pity about why it's not working. But when I really began to step back and look at it, I was like, oh, I need capital. I need like connections. I need coaching. And there weren't really programs that were focused on people who look like me to solve that problem. And so I said, I want to create a business to solve that problem. Like if I can create a business that can help other business owners or budding entrepreneurs, realize their vision, and then A, I think that that would be awesome. B, I think we're solving a real problem, and so that's what I did. And at the time, I was living in New York. I went to 5 people and I said, "Hey, I think entrepreneurs of color need coaching, capital, and connections. We probably need it sooner because of a set of historical reasons. I wish I could snap my fingers and change, but here we are." And I said, I don't have any money to give you. So sorry, I can't give you any money, but I'll be your coach. And I'll use all my connections, in my decade at that point of sort of working and being in different professional settings. And 3 of them said yes. And so that's what we did. And I would just meet with them in coffee shops, or there was no Zoom at the time. So I think it was whatever the Google platform was. We would just chat, have these little evening sessions. And it was kind of like going back to my teaching days. I would every couple of evenings we'd have a class and I'd be writing the curriculum the morning of, okay, this is what we're going to teach. And, it wasn't perfect, but what it did was it gave us real people to talk about. I could talk about Delano Brissett, who had this idea to start a company where anyone could go to any community college if they wanted around the country. And he was trying to build a platform to do that. And we could talk about how we partnered with the Flatiron School to help him build his prototype in 6 weeks. So he went from trying to teach himself how to code to build the prototype to having students who were learning how to code, build a prototype, to then having customers 6 weeks later. Right? So we were able to tell those stories. And this was just on a shoestring budget. It was just me and a laptop and a couple $1,000s. And we told that story. We did that for 4 or 5 months. And then we told that story and were able to raise $1 million. And, that $1 million really became everything that Camelback Ventures has grown to be at this point. And, that was a key lesson. I think one of the lessons I learned from my first 2 companies is that you can try to perfect it on paper. The perfect plan, the perfect proposal, the perfect concept paper. And, the old Mike Tyson saying that everyone has a plan until you get punched in the mouth.
Yeah.
You kind of get to put it out there in the real world and get punched in the mouth and kind of see what works and see what doesn't. And, I think doing that faster with this idea helped in many ways to validate it, but also to show people that like it wasn't like a intellectual exercise, but that it was like a real thing that we were working on.
Mm-hmm. And you are unaware of this, but actually, you told me this when you told me this story about how you just went out and got started with a very small, almost non-existent budget, and you just did the work and like proved that it could happen. That has impacted me because it makes me feel like, the work I want to do, which is very similar in nature, only probably different in the way the focus area, so not education. But it inspires me to act too, because I think I spend a lot of time again in imposter syndrome land, and I don't have experience land. All of those things connect, and if I can just do things and tell the story to get whatever result happens, it's possible for me to start as well. So that has definitely been something I've been thinking about, and it's pushed me to act faster than I thought I would, because I wanted to have the perfect concept on paper, and I wanted to have, all the logic chains flow, and like, okay, well, the business is here, and we need this, and that's just something you learn by experience, and I am actively learning. So, hey.
Definitely. Look, and people will ask you those questions, and I think there's some utility in having thought about those things, and at least for me, the reality is that like none of those things make a successful company.
Yeah, exactly. Okay, well, let's zoom out even more then. How did you even know you wanted to be an entrepreneur? You mentioned you had 2 ventures before Camelback. How did this start in your soul? Did you always know?
Absolutely not. I mean, if you had asked me when I graduated college 20 years ago if this is what I would be doing, the answer would have been no. I think the through line of everything that I've done over the last 20 years, including this work, is that I'm just trying to figure out how to like use my skills and the contributions that I have to create a world where young people, in particular young people of color, can grow up to be whatever they want, regardless of where they live. And so for me, when I started as a teacher, that was the vision. And then I realized that in so many ways we ask teachers to overcome a set of impossible hurdles to provide kids what really at the end of the day is a basic education. And I started to become disillusioned with this idea of helping young people beat the odds. And it was like, so how do we help them get rid of the odds? And then my teaching experience sort of showed me that a lot of the challenges that young people face are things that don't happen in the school. It's all the stuff that's happening around them, which in many ways are byproducts of income inequality and poverty and racism and sexism. And so the idea to go to law school was really to say, hey, how can I gain a broader set of skills? How can I understand how policy works so that I can be a part of a system that can deconstruct some of those some of those hurdles. And then I think along the way I just realized that entrepreneurs are the ones who are thinking about the future, like in a lot of the way that the law works is precedent. Like, how do we kind of look in the past to figure out what we're going to do in the future? And what I found compelling about entrepreneurship was that entrepreneurs, I'm not saying that they didn't have a regard for the past, but their eyes were set on like what the world could look like.
Yes.
and they were set, and their intention was set on making that happen. And that was exciting to me. That was compelling to me. And I think I said like that's where I want to have my eyes set. And so I think I had an opportunity after I left the law firm to work at a place called the Fund for Public Schools, where I got to work with entrepreneurs, and we got to fund some of their ideas, and I started to see the power of what that could look like. And the only thing I wanted was to have those entrepreneurs who we were funding be more diverse.
Yeah. Yeah.
That sort of led me down the path, down the path that I'm on now.
I just think it's so cool. It's so dope. That's what I like to say now. It's so dope that, you built this with a team and it's grown and there's a fellowship because just imagine if this was happening more often nationally and for longer, like where we would be. And I'm sure you've thought about that. And again, it is because, I set on the future. But also having the eye set on the future, at least in my experience, can also be very scary because it's not everyone's forte. It comes with a lot of uncertainty, risk management, investment in things that, hey, you can't prove will work for you yet. And there's just a whole litany of things to kind of self-manage for when you are the entrepreneurial visionary type person. Can you talk a little bit more about some of the challenges you faced in your first startups? Just for any listeners a lot of listeners are interested in creating things themselves and how did you get through those periods? What did you learn?
Yeah. I mean, the first company that I worked on was called Teacher Capital Management, and at least that's what I called it. And the idea was really to figure out how to create a teacher talent agency was the idea. Having been a teacher myself, I just thought, we're always talking about elevating the teaching profession, and teachers should get paid, what they're worth. And I looked around and I said, I believe in representation. I'm not like a anti-union type of person, but when I look at it from a business perspective, it was essentially a situation where one entity had a monopoly over the representation of teachers. And what could it look like if teachers had options? And I felt like sometimes group representation plays to the lowest common denominator, right? It plays to sort of protect the sort of lowest performing person. And it's like, well, what about all those teachers who are not low performing, who are great, who want to be great, who don't deserve just to make whatever it says on the 7th year step ladder, that they're actually worth more than that. And how can we create a system of representation that could lean into that idea? Anyway, I say all this to sort of not regurgitate, what the idea was, but to say that one of those first lessons was just understanding that part of having a successful business is making sure that the policy environment is conducive to you actually building the business. And so one of the things I learned in that company was that to actually pull this business off, I was going to have to, I was in New York at the time. I was going to have to get 80,000 teachers to sign up to decertify their union. Oh. And I was like, well, one, again, I'm not anti-union. So there was some tension with that. But also from a pure business standpoint, I was like, well, how's that going to happen? Why are 80,000 teachers who never heard of me going to just sign up to try something different? And, what is it going to take to make that happen? And I just realized really quickly that I didn't have the time or the resources or the clout to be able to make that happen. And that was fundamental to the business being a success. And so you can have these great ideas, but there are, our business ideas live in the world, and part of the world are, policy constraints and kind of rules and regulations that you have to operate within. And, you've seen that play out in different aspects, whatever you feel about Uber, right? They had to kind of go and figure out how to navigate that with, different municipalities around taxis, and the same thing with Airbnb, some of the rules and regulations around hotels and stuff like that. So, oftentimes when you're trying to change something, there are rules set in place to kind of, keep the status quo. And you got to think about that and sort of at least have an idea or a plan or vision for how you're going to work through that. So I think that was one of the biggest things I learned from my first company was just the importance of those things. And then I think with the second, the company that I worked on, it was a company that was essentially trying to be an expert network for the social sector. So if anyone has ever heard of, GLG, Gerson Lehman Group, they work mainly in the private sector, but they are essentially a network of experts that they have where if you need something less than the consultancy. You can, call someone, you can do an hour call, you can get, expert advice on something. And as I was looking in the social sector and education, I was just realizing like, hey, there's a level of talent need that isn't a full-time employee, that isn't a long-term consultant, but there is like some short-term expertise that schools and other impact organizations need that they don't have access to. And so tried to build that idea. And, part of the way through, I realized two things. One is that it was a problem that needed to be solved, but I wasn't the right one to do it. And so I just stopped working on it. And I think that's okay. I think, there's no rule that says if you start something, you have to work on it for a certain amount of time. But my thought is that it takes a good 5 to 10 years for a founder to really get an idea off the ground. And I think you have to ask yourself, like, are you ready to put in, that amount of time to sort of get there? And I think if the answer is yes, like, go forth, but if the answer is no, or it's kind of like a cool idea, but you sort of see it more as a side hustle, then treat it like a side hustle, right? But I wouldn't treat it as like the main thing in the company that you're going to build. And we only have only so much time, on this earth. And so it's like, how do you want to spend your time? And I just realized that was an important problem. It wasn't exactly how I wanted to spend 10 years. And now I have the pleasure of actually sitting on the board of a organization who's doing it, and a leader who I think is the right person to do it and has been doing an amazing job. And I can contribute in the ways that I know how to contribute. And that's perfect.
That is. Okay, so it sounds like you had to understand the enabling really understand the kind of the market and enabling conditions for that first business you mentioned with the teacher capital network.
Yeah.
And then in the second instance, it was like, to me, I'm going to brand it like more spiritual, as in, is this actually my strength? Is this in my wheelhouse? Or is this just an aspiration or an idea I have that, is not suited as well to me as it could be? And then also, knowing that entrepreneurship and building a successful venture takes a lot of time, effort, energy, resources, risk. We've already talked about that. But yes, it takes all of that. And to be really steadfast in that approach is how awesome things happen. And so just knowing, listeners, if you really feel like there's something you can't let go, then that feels like the right thing. But if it's anything less than that, then there's some evaluation to take place.
Yeah, it takes a lot of sacrifice of your time, and you just have to understand. Are you ready to sacrifice your time, potentially some of your relationships, to make that?
Yes. Oh man, again, that's a whole nother conversation, Aaron. But yes, totally. Like building a business, a venture, an organization, it's like birthing a child, literally. Birthing process. There are a lot of things you can't do anymore when you're birthing. You know what I mean? And it's the same way. There's habits you got to cut out, relationships, energy to stay focused and committed. And yeah, so, okay, but that was back then. That was back then. Took a little wind over there, wind path. For the listeners that can't see me right now, I made a little hand. But I want to bring it back to the present because, I heard of Camelback for the first time, and it's like very awesome state it's in now from Jeff Livingston, my current mentor and boss. And I'm curious, like, what are the types of challenges that you address now? Like, okay, you've built the venture, you got a team, the programming's grown, there's funding, but what are the types of challenges that an entrepreneur can expect to face when they get to this successful place and there's push behind them and a whole network of fellows, for example?
Yeah. I mean, I think my title has been the same since day one, which is founder, CEO, but in many ways my role has changed. I've had a couple different iterations of this job. And I think at this stage, part of the job is how do you manage through others. In the beginning, you can kind of wrap your arms around everything. You sort of know every bit of information. You know where every document is. You're involved in every single decision. But as the organization grows and there are more people there, which is I think what most people want, there can be this tension point for founders to figure out, like, what does it mean to let go? What does it mean to have other people make decisions? What does it mean to not know every single bit of information of everything that's going on? And how can you still be an effective leader, in that space? And so I think the way that I think about it is that, so two things. One, like, culture becomes even more important, because culture then is the thing that sort of is the birdie on people's ear that's talking to them about how to behave and how to think and how to interact with other people, so that you don't have to be that be that person all the time. And I think you can scale culture. I think it's hard. It's hard to scale yourself as a leader, right? So in many ways, I think I try to use culture as a way to do that. And then two is, like, systems start to really matter. Like, we're still working on it, but we've been working on this decision making matrix for the last 6 months, and basically it's a spreadsheet that outlines, like, many major decisions that need to be made at the organization, and who decides and who has to be consulted. And those things sound, probably to some founders sound really boring, like a spreadsheet where we have to
Important.
like who decides what and who has to be involved in what. But the answer is yeah, because otherwise it feels like chaos. It feels like chaos to you. It feels like chaos to the people who work for you. And then you're just figuring everything out on the fly, right? So then it becomes one of those scale things. And so I think oftentimes in the discussion on entrepreneurship, we talk about scale and it sounds really awesome, sexy. It's like, man, we went from 10 people to 50 to 100. We raised $1 million. Now we're raising $10 million. Now we're raising $100 million. We're in one country. Now we're in 10. We were in one state. Now we're in 50. And all those things are awesome and great. And I think there's nothing to be ashamed of when it comes to those things.
Okay.
And what I found, at least, is that the day-to-day work of scale is the stuff I'm talking about. What's the decision-making matrix? How do you have more efficient accounting systems so that people get paid on time and, contracts aren't late? What are the policies that need to be written? Because, in the beginning you could kind of just, spitball it and just sort of make it up. But now you've got 50 people and you can't just say, well, like, you could do whatever you want, but these people get to follow the rules. But on Sunday, this is what happens. And like, someone has to sit down and write those things. And, you have people, they want to develop in your organization and they want to know what their career ladder is. And, you can't just be like, work hard and we'll see what happens. Like, you have to tell people, here's what a career ladder looks like. You have to, like, lay those things out for folks. You have to have, like, professional development, because you want you have to grow people, and that has to be systematized. And so like, that's what the job is now, and that's fine. Like, I think it's a good space to be in, but that is very different than when I first started, and my job was to be the chief everything officer.
Yeah, you were programming, you were running everything. Yeah, raising, do your chief development, chief program. Yeah. Cool. Man, but that is a big goal, though, to get to that, for me, to get to that point where, culture setting is the focus, and, like, onboarding people the right way is the focus, and having a system around that, and payroll structure, and all those things that are so important for having more people on board and also having more business and all those things. So, while systems, can sound less sexy, it's still extremely important, especially when we talk about scale. Like, scale of impact means scale of resources. Growth means you have a more expensive overhead, just all types of things. And being able to manage for that, and also, not have ourselves in binds, systems can really help that. Okay. I have second to last question. I want you to, like, put in your mind a very young entrepreneur. Like, this audience is mostly 20 to 30, mid 30, mostly. We have more than that. So if, you imagine the listener is someone really creative, usually someone who hasn't started something yet but has a lot of ideas often, and like just as a serial creative person, what advice would you have to them if as a beginner entrepreneur?
So I think a couple things. One is always hold the big vision in your mind and in your heart, and also figure out what's the smallest thing that you can do to get started. Like you don't need to do the whole thing from day one. There are things that we're just getting to now in year 9 at Camelback that I had thought about when we started. Right, so be patient with yourself. It's going to take some time, but like figure out what's the smallest thing you could do to get started. So for me, it was just working with those 3 entrepreneurs and just trying something out and starting to build from there. But don't let the big vision go, right? Because sometimes people can say to you, well, that's how you're going to pull all that off. And then you start to make yourself small. You start to make your ideas small, and you kind of forget. You forget the big vision. And I think you have to do it opposite. You got to hold on to it and like figure out like what you can do right now. So I think that's one. 2 is, particularly for folks of color, that we've been here, right? Like I think oftentimes we look out into the world and, the face of entrepreneurship does not look like us. And I remember when I was first getting started, I had a like a coffee conversation with Dr. Michael Lomax, who is the CEO of the UNCF, United Negro College Fund. And, he just reminded me in this conversation that, we've been entrepreneurs for a long time. And the fact that, folks of color, and particularly Black folks, have made it this far is a testament to our entrepreneurship.
Yes.
So, one of the examples that always sticks with me is, we look at someone like Harriet Tubman as like a abolitionist and an activist and all those things, which is true. And in some ways, we could reframe her and say that she was one of the first transportation entrepreneurs. That she, devised the system and tools, and she had a plan for how to make it happen. And we don't have to just sort of see her as like part of the civil rights story. We can sort of see her as part of our entrepreneurial legacy as well. And because of that, then it's in our blood, it's in our DNA, and not to sort of lose sight of that, because people can make you feel like you just showed up here, that entrepreneurship is not something that is for you, and I reject all of that. And then I think the third thing is figure out what the change is. I think every business, whether you call it an impact business or not, there's a vision that person has for what they want to see in the world. And I think like hold on to that more than what the business idea is. That'll change. It'll change over time. Maybe you'll get it exactly right. Maybe, right from the beginning. And if you do, awesome. But I think holding on to the change that you want to see, what you want the world to look like, and then being open to what that might look like and how you might have to change your idea or tweak it to the feedback you're getting. We'll just sort of will help you sort of have staying power.
Ooh, okay. I love those. That's right. Entrepreneurship is for us. Don't sacrifice the big vision. And don't get too attached to the minutia, because they might change. I love that. Erin, wow. Oh, I'm so excited because I know that so many folks have these ideas, and it's so easy in human nature to have fear, get in the way of our big plans and big sights that we have and are gifted with. And I think this conversation will serve as a really important input to anyone who's considering, jumping off that ledge, because it is a jump off, but jumping off that for that.
Yeah. And can I add one more thing, which is that, just to give some more color to my own experience for whatever it's worth, is that, I was working a regular job, had these ideas that I wanted to work on. Was applying to the programs and trying to see if I can get in, and I was getting some traction, and I thought, okay, now's the time to leave. So I quit to sort of work on this full time. And then a couple weeks later, my wife and I found out that we were going to have our first kid. And I was like, oh, this is great. And this was not part of the plan, right? And in that moment, you have that panic moment where you're like, oh man, maybe I should go back and get a job, because kids don't stop eating and they don't stop growing, and having money is important, right? Like, is this the time to be sort of playing entrepreneur? That was not the choice I made. I had an amazing partner who sort of supported me through that. But I say all that to say is that you just never know how it's going to go, right? You just never know how it's going to go. And to the extent that anyone finds any comfort in my own story, I just thought I wanted to share that.
Oh, yes, absolutely. We never know how it's going to go, but we can see and move toward what we see and let everything else happen as long as we act too. And I think that's beautiful. It's been my story. I'm sure it's other people's stories that you see, act, and other things happen too, and they just steer you along. And I think this is an extremely valuable conversation for anyone to listen to who's on that spectrum of wanting to leave, wanting to start something, wanting to take a baby step, all of those different realities. So thank you for that. Thank you for the storytelling. It's important. Look at that Gemini skill set right there.
That sounds like you know stuff about the zodiac that I don't.
Oh, yeah. Well, Gemini is a master communicator, storyteller, and person who can relinquish information from like day-to-day interaction, like conversations with, you're always learning, always curious, have a lot of mental agility, and it's just a really great thing.
Okay.
So
I'll take that description.
Yes, it's a great thing. And also, if folks are, feeling like they identify a lot with this conversation and are interested in what you're doing, what are the channels that they can seek to connect with you or see the work and Camelback?
Definitely. So we have a website, camelbackventures.org. You can go onto it right now. For those who are interested, potentially in working with Camelback, you can go check that out. We have a little, we call it eligibility quiz. So before filling out the whole application, you can take this couple-minute thing just to kind of see if you would be a good fit. And so, you don't have to take the answer that comes out of that quiz as gospel, but at least it can give you some sense of whether it might be a good match for what you're trying to do. And then you can check us out on, all the social media channels with the handle Camelback.org.
Camelback.org. Awesome. Well, thank you so much, Aaron. I hope listeners, you're feeling refreshed, inspired, and activated. Activated is the word after this conversation. And there are plenty more on this season that tied to this about, being confident in your vision and being confident in the action you may take, and listening to folks who have kind of made the journey work for themselves and turn into a career. And so thank you, Aaron, for coming and representing yourself and Camelback Ventures today on the show. And listeners, we'll talk to you soon.
Thank you.
Listeners, you just heard a really powerful conversation with Mr. Aaron Walker, and I love talking to Black entrepreneurs. I absolutely love it, and I hope you loved it too. If you have any questions about anything we discussed, feel free to hit our DM at working.within or email me at charlene@workingwithin.net. We are here as a resource to entrepreneurs, especially Black entrepreneurs, entrepreneurs of color, women entrepreneurs. We want to be able to kind of have those conversations with you because it's what I'm going through now. It's what my team is going through as well. And so this conversation really hits home for me, and you'll hear that, I'm reading this book. A lot of things are coming to surface for me, and I'm just grateful that Aaron was able to come on the show. So absolutely, feel free to connect with us. Thank you so much for listening.